And I really like this play. Full disclosure, this play has a special place for me. When my wife and I started dating, it was way back in the Middle Ages, we were living in different states, and she had this idea that we should read books together. And I was like, I don't know how to read. And so she said, well, read this play from Shakespeare. It's called Much Ado About Nothing. And then she says this, she says, Beatrice is one of my favorite all-time characters. So I started reading it. And I was like, dang, I'm in a lot of trouble.
I'm in danger!
Long story short, I had to go earn a PhD to match the wit of her banter. Anyways, I like this play. Those exchanges between Benedick and Beatrice are still hilarious. Remember, one of the main ways the hero and the beloved interact is through puns and jokes, so setting up each other, finishing each other's punchlines. It shows that they're matched for each other intellectually and they can sort of share the spotlight. Before we even see them together, Leonardo orients us toward the relationship. He says it's something like a merry war betwixt them. There's this great moment we see them together at the very beginning of the play. This is the very first scene where they have this really great exchange. He starts with, "What, my dear Lady Disdain? Are you yet living? Like, wow, you're still alive? Huh." And then Beatrice is all, "Is it possible Disdain should die while she has such meat food to feed it as Signor Benedick? Courtesy itself must convert to disdain if you come into her presence. So how could disdain die when you're around to keep it alive?" And then Benedict says, "Then courtesy is a turncoat, but it is certain I am loved of all ladies, only you excepted. And I would I could find it in my heart that I had not a hard heart, for truly I love none. A dear happiness to women. They would else have been troubled for a pernicious suitor. I thank God in my cold blood I am of your humor for that. I'd rather hear my dog bark at a crow than a man swear he loves me. God keep your ladyship still in that mind, so some gentleman or other shall scape a predestined scratched face. Scratching cannot make it worse, and 'twere such a face as yours." I mean, this is great. They're trying to best each other with insults, and each one follows the insult of the previous. This is like the historical predecessor to the rap battle. These two deserve each other. Okay, so this is another comedy, so we should be on the lookout for more reconciliation again. It's important to note that contemporary literary critics tend to read this play as a social comedy. That means that the reconciliation of the play is meant to be symbolic or metaphorical affirmation of the social order, or at the very least a reflection of it. For example, Claire McEachran calls the play Shakespeare's most socially and psychologically realistic of his comedies in its portrayal of the foibles and generosities of communal life. Much Ado About Nothing represents a world governed, even poisoned, by male rivalry, in which conventions of gender and status shape emotional attachments, in which men and women fear each other, and in which only the most accidental of provinces can save an innocent woman from the effects of slander and a man from death by combat. In the same vein, Stephen Greenback claims the play is pervasively concerned with social performance, that it seems at once spontaneous and calculated. For manners are the lived texture of social life in Much Ado, not in the sense of a compulsory set of rules, but rather in the sense of an evolving awareness of mutual obligation and interconnectedness. This all seems right to me, especially regarding the main plot of Claudio and Hero. We start off with Claudio coming home from war where he's made a name for himself with Don Pedro, but now the fighting's done and it's time to get married. The accepted roles for a man are warrior and husband. Hence the big rush to get married. There really is no alternative. These are both social roles, defending the state and ensuring future offspring as its subjects. In this worldview, a bachelor or an old maid are a drain on society. They produce nothing for that sense of mutual obligation and interconnectedness, and they're largely outside the foibles and generosities of communal life. So what's all this got to do with reconciliation? Well, remember when we were talking about Olivia in Twelfth Night? Everyone seems to agree that Olivia gets the short end of the stick. Her marriage, her reconciliation is really unsatisfying, even maybe especially when we consider the historical context, the plague, that makes her marriage absolutely necessary. Now, just as review, remember the comedy works in 3 beats: status quo, negation of the status quo, and reconciliation, where the negation of the status quo is overcome and a new stasis emerges. Now, the negation in all of this is meant to be a temporary stage, but it's necessary to tear us out of the status quo so that a new world can become possible. That process of change is scary and at times violent, certainly uncomfortable, but the comic world is one in which that upheaval will result in a new and better world. Comedy gives us the promise that trouble will turn into joy. But with that promise, there's also a threat. When we're in the midst of trouble, of negation, the danger is we'll settle for a simple return to normal, a return of that first iteration of the status quo. But that starting point, that status quo, was unlivable, even if we refused to see it at the time. But that's the danger of the status quo. We merely passively accept its unlivability. We ignore the dehumanizing, unjust, and life-denying aspects of it. And worst of all, we pass it off as merely natural. If you ever heard someone say, hey, it's just the way things are, that person has uncritically accepted the status quo. At the same time, negation is a crisis. When the status quo gets upset, things feel worse. But the comedy gives us faith that a better world is waiting. So, the comedy works like this. Status quo, things are bad but I don't know it. Negation, things are worse. And then the threat, please God, let it go back to normal. But if things go back to normal, then those unlivable, life-denying contradictions never get rooted out. I'm not feeling the suffering of a crisis, sure, but I've settled for a worse world. This is false reconciliation, and it threatens to undo everything. I think part of the reason we don't find Olivia's story in Twelfth Night satisfying is because she's locked in a false reconciliation. The suffering ends, sure, but it ends by merely returning her to the place she was before, subjugated to a man in control of her fortune, a man not of her choosing, but one she must submit to because of social expectation. It's a return to step one. It's a failed dialectic. So is Much Ado's emphasis on social order another example of false reconciliation? I think it might be. Claudio seems contrite at the end, sure, but he doesn't really learn his lesson. His problem this whole time has been trusting too easily in the things he sees, uncritically accepting the world around him and merely following the order placed before him. Go to war, get married, assume your fiancé is just waiting for the chance to cheat on you. Look, there's a ton of cuckold jokes in this. Always trust your eyes, above all else, even at night, from far away, when you can't really see what's going on. I'm sure Don John is telling the truth. Why would he lie? Hero, too. I mean, your fiancé is ready to believe you're unfaithful, even on the slightest evidence, and won't for a second consider your defense. And then, dude, you have to fake your own death to get back into his good graces? This does not seem like the start of a happy marriage. Again, though, the motivation here isn't really love, it's social order. The veneer of being in love is stretched very thinly over that more fundamental drive. In fact, the only reason Don John is able to make such a mockery of those other fools is because he has no place in the social world. He's a bastard. He has no inheritance, no name, no place in the family line. He's the outcast the status quo seeks to obscure, the one that the initial stasis of the world of the play purposefully makes no room for. He's therefore rendered evil, base, malcontent, only by virtue of his being excluded from the social order. And so he's represented as incapable of goodness, by the mere nature of his being. So is this a bad comedy? I mean, the main plot, mistaken identity, reunited lovers, all that stuff, leads us towards false reconciliation. Here, the marriage just reinforces the status quo. It doesn't transform it. But I think if we look at the play this way, we're really missing out on the subversive heart of what's going on here. After all, if it were bad at being a comedy, we probably wouldn't be reading it for 400 years. I think you'll notice right away, too, that if all we talk about is Claudio and Hero, we're missing a huge part of this play. Now, most plays at this time, most comedies, have two overlapping plots. We have the main plot and the subplot. The main plot is really determined by the characters who make choices, or rather, the characters' choices determine the action of the plot. It moves the plot forward because of the things they do. The subplot is usually ornamental. In most cases, the clever servant character type becomes the main focus of the plot. The subplot is typically where you find more of your jokes and wordplay, the most antics and silliness, while the main plot is usually the young hero moving towards marriage. The subplot typically ends in marriage too, though, the clever male servant of the hero marrying some clever female compatriot of the beloved. Now this makes it pretty obvious that Benedick and Beatrice's love-hate affair is meant to be the play's subplot. But a quick glance at the text will show you that Claudio and Hero are certainly not the stars of this play. Hero only has about 40 lines total, compared with over 100 lines for Beatrice. Benedick's presence, too, on stage far outweighs Claudio's. He has multiple soliloquies, and Claudio gets none. Benedick is always a presence on the stage, while Claudio typically shrinks into the scenery. Check out this recent example with David Tennant as Benedict and Catherine Tate as Beatrice.
Ah, Don Pedro's approach.
Oh, good Signor Leonato. You are come to meet your trouble. The fashion of the world is to avoid cost, and you encounter it.
Never came trouble to my house in the likeness of your grace.
You embrace your charge too willingly. I think this is your daughter.
Her mother hath many times told me so.
Were you in doubt, sir, that you asked her?
Signor Benedick, no, for then were you a child.
You have it full, Benedick. Truly the lady fathers herself. Oh, be happy, lady, for you are like an honourable father.
If Signor Leonato be her father, she would not have his head on her shoulders for all Messina, as like him as she is.
I wonder that you will still be talking, Signor Benedick. Nobody marks you.
What? My dear Lady Disdain, are you yet living?
I think we all know who's getting top billing in this production. Hell, you can't even identify Claudio in that group. Here's the important bit. When we examine the love story that develops with Benedick and Beatrice, we see something very different than your standard affirmation of the status quo. Now, on the surface, this all seems to mirror the same path as the main plot, maybe even more nefariously since they're being tricked into loving each other. Except not really. The opposite, in fact. The social roles they're trying to maintain are the shrew and the bachelor. We'll get more on that next week. These roles are not true to who they are, to what they actually want. What needs to happen here is that the inner feelings and identities of these characters needs to come into alignment with the outward reality. That is, we need a synthesis, a reconciliation with their true selves and the social sphere. But here's the threat. If they merely get married for getting married's sake, they're just repeating the same inauthenticity in a new role. They're still socially performing the status quo, but this time as nag and cuck. There's a real danger here of false reconciliation, and the irony is that it looks a lot like true reconciliation in this case. So what's the difference? Well, it may seem a bit technical, but this is all rooted in one line from Benedict. This is Act 5, Scene 2, about line 30 or so. Benedict is talking about these classical and mythological figures who have become enshrined as the prototypical lover. And he says, "They never so truly turned over and over as my poor self in love. Mary, I cannot show it in rhyme. I have tried. Can find no rhyme for lady but baby, an innocent rhyme. For scorn, horn, a hard rhyme. For school, fool, a babbling rhyme. Very ominous endings. No, I was not born under a rhyming planet, nor can I woo in festival terms." Dude can't write poetry. Why is that important? Well, it's a somewhat common convention at the time to show the love between characters by making them compose a sonnet together. Check out this exchange between Romeo and Juliet. This is written about the same time as Much Ado. This is when the kids first meet at the Capulet's costume party.
If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle sin is this. My lips, two blushing pilgrims ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss.
Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hands too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this. For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss.
Have not saints lips and holy palmers too?
Aye, pilgrim lips that they must use in prayer.
Oh, then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray, grant thou lest faith turn to despair.
Saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake.
Then move not, while my prayers effect, I take.
You poetry nerds will see this right away. Iambic pentameter, alternating rhyme scheme, 3 quatrains and a rhymed couplet. This is a sonnet. This is kind of the Elizabethan parallel to the falling in love montage we have in films today. You know, a bunch of shots of the two on a date, walking on the beach, laughing, dinner by candlelight. We use a series of shots and scenes, usually with some gimmicky pop song laid over it, to condense the time it takes to fall in love with someone into a manageable 2-minute runtime. Audiences are trained to accept these montages as a substitute for real relationship development. After we see the two together like this, we can just accept that they're now in love and their love is genuine. Well, obviously, on stage, you don't have the luxury of a montage, but you still need to show that these two actually do love each other, and in a very short amount of time. What better way than to show them mutually composing the most standard form of love poetry around? See, that's great for Romeo, or I mean, not great as the case may be, but it doesn't work for Benedict. He's not born under a rhyming planet. Dude can't write sonnets. Beatrice seems like she's more capable of this sort of thing. After Hero and Margaret spring the trap for her, she comes forward and gives a soliloquy. This is Act 3, Scene 1, right near the end, about line 107. What fire is in mine ears? Can this be true? Stand I condemned for pride and scorn so much? Contempt farewell, and maiden pride adieu. No glory lives behind the back of such. And Benedict, love on, I will requite thee. Taming my wild heart to thy loving hand. If thou dost love, my kindness shall incite thee, to bind our loves up in a holy band. For others say thou dost deserve, and I believe it better than reportingly. We have an AB rhyme scheme. I am a pentameter, full stop at lines 4 and 8, setting up what would be 2 quatrains, then a rhyme couplet at the end. This is almost a sonnet. We're missing 1 complete stanza. In the traditional montage love scene, Benedict would come in here and add that missing piece, but he doesn't. He's not a rhymer. So then at the end of the play, we find the two are still hesitant to say they love each other. The standard mode of showing love on stage in verse is not really available to them. And just before they break each other's hearts and go their separate ways, what appears? 2 love poems. This is Act 5, Scene 4, line 84. Leonardo says to Beatrice, "Come, cousin, I am sure you love the gentleman." And then Claudio butts in and says, "And I'll be sworn upon it he loves her, for here is a paper written in his hand, a halting sonnet of his own pure brain, fashioned to Beatrice." And then Hero adds, "And here's another, written in my cousin's hand, stolen from her pocket, containing her affection unto Benedict." So they were writing sonnets this whole time, but we, the audience, never get to read them. These are and remain private signs of their love for each other. This isn't mere social performativity. We're never privy to the content of these poems, but they are enough for each of them to accept the true love of the other. I love the way this play ends. Benedict says, "I'll tell thee what, Prince, a college of witcrackers cannot flout me out of my humor. Dost thou think I care for a satire or an epigram? No. Since I do purpose to marry, I will think nothing of any purpose that the world can say against it." Look, the comic world wants us to believe in joy, that joy is still possible and change can actually happen, and the world can become a better place than it is. But that doesn't mean it's simple. On the one hand, there's a real danger in times of struggle that will want to simply return to easier times, to go back to normal, even though normal was terrible. On the other hand, there's a danger our cynicism will resist true reconciliation because it looks too much like that standard, expected conventionality of the status quo. But here's the thing. If you really want reconciliation, and all the hope it promises, you've got to thread that needle. And really, ironically, for this play, that means to hang social expectation for the sake of being truly sociable.